with another goddess that's known at the time. We did say 150 of them were there who were excised, but you can clearly see that something's going on. Who's this Lilith? Where did she come from? Why the sexual imagery? Well, we need to look at that. But yeah, let's go on.
Asherah and her daughter Anat appear in the disguised form as Saint Anne and the Virgin Mary. Leonardo da Vinci has Mary sitting in Anne's lap. Like Asherah and Anat, they are in the guise of wet nurses and their young son lovers, Jesus and John. Asherah may precede the Canaanites as the goddess Asheratum of the Amorites, with her male consort Anu being equivalent to the Canaanite El, who was finally transmogrified into Yahweh or Jehovah. The Phoenicians knew her as Eleth. Amorite kings bore titles such as slaves of Asherah. Originally, a statue of Asherah was included in the Temple of Jerusalem, built as it was not by Jews, but Phoenicians. She was worshipped in Arabia under the name Asherath, in Babylon as Astarte, and in Sumeria as Inanna Ishtar. Her Western antitype is Ostara, after which we get the term Easter.
See that? And don't forget Ta'urt will be the Egyptian prototype there. And Ta'urt and this kind of goddess that we're talking about was also deified there. The nobleman could not possibly become pharaoh unless he was initiated by her representative, somebody that was a member of the dragon court, the original dragon court, which was nothing but the great royal wives, one of the earliest secret societies in the world. And it's female. So all the ones that you read time and time again, all the websites that talk about the dragon court, they never mention this. They never even they haven't even the faintest idea of the feminine component, that I brought out in my work in the female Illuminati. The original great dragon court was feminine. Female. Doesn't mean it was all evil. That's not what we're saying, because it was made up of many people. But the simple fact is that a nobleman could not graduate to becoming pharaoh. In fact, even the female couldn't become pharaoh herself, probably without being a member of the great royal wife line, or at least being approved by them. One way or another, both sexes had to be approved to be pharaoh of the world. So there it says slaves of the goddess. You were slaves of Asherah. You were slaves of Inanna or Ashtarte. And Ta'urt is another one, another rendering of the name. Taweret would be another. We get a lot of our English words from this. Let's go on.
The temple. The biblical text itself acknowledges that the Israelite tripartite temple was really Phoenician in design, designed by Phoenician architects and built by Phoenician craftsmen and artisans. You can see 1 Kings 5:1-12 and 7:13-14.
That's right. And that's so clearly known, but everybody cringed at this because they didn't want to, we just opened this program by telling you about the pagan influence. It was so glaring. You had to bring in this guy called Hiram Abiff, the Phoenician, thereby letting the whole world know through the biblical textures that the masters in wood building, the masters in shipbuilding, and of course, if you're good at those two things, then you must be good at astronomy, because both the architecture of sacred temples and sailing the high seas in boats requires you to know about the stars. Uh-oh, what kind of worms are we opening here? Who are these Phoenicians? Oh, they're just the ones that gave us our alphabet. Ever looked up the word Cadmean alphabet, the history of the alphabet? Oh, that's Phoenician too, not Jewish. Yeah, I think we need to turn the page and move on, right? We don't want to know who these Phoenician Canaanites were. Or the fact that they didn't even call themselves Phoenicians, they call themselves Arcadians. Yeah, anybody into that? Anybody want to know about what Commons Beaumont got to say about that, where their origins are from? No, I don't think so. We're still in the teething stages there, right? But this whole thing blew it wide open. Why would the Jews build their temple to their God using foreign labor and all the symbolism that was involved? Or was it foreign labor? Or was Jehovah just a special God? Maybe that God was recognized by the Phoenicians as well. Maybe the Jews borrowed the God from them. And what we're looking at from our stages of history is a lot of myth-mongering and lies, obscuring the actual truth. Maybe this God and others were well known to the other people at the time, and these divisions didn't exist until biblical scriptures were written, making it look like they were different, But those scriptures are written hundreds and hundreds of years later. Oh, dear. Then what? Let's go on.
The Phoenicians. Works of Old Testament theology, not surprisingly, have downplayed or even denied the existence of magic in ancient Israel. The Phoenicians were not only the contemporary Iron Age descendants of the Canaanites and heirs of their long civilization, but they were now despised foreigners who worshipped Baal, not Israelite Yahweh.
And another thing is that they found, they kept it quiet, but John Allegro and others knew about it. They found temples. They dug them up in the Judea. There are temples to Jehovah. There are temples, run by the rabbis and the ancient priests of the Jews. And they found altars with bowls, and inside the bowl is cannabis resin. Right? No doubt about it. Absolutely officially stated. It was in all the magazines, and it was kept quiet after that. Cannabis resin was discovered. So there was a lot more going on, if you talk about tree worship, then you've got to understand the whole thing about the Amanita muscaria that we talked about before, right, in our previous shows on that. And you also have to understand that hemp, cannabis, whatever you want to call it, was used. We have to talk about the fact that, we went into it, right, about the different potions and unguents and unctions that were created, infused with what can only be described as the soma, but we went into the sort of gory details of what that might entail. Remember, these old Jewish priests were into it, but what I'm trying to point out, though, is that this practice was more common amongst the feminine cults, the female cults, than it was about the male. The male may have appropriated it later as one of the things that was, left over after the suppression of these goddess cults. Innumerable motifs were still preserved, but they were given a different window dressing. And one of them was this plant use, entheogens, and so on. But let's go on.
The goddess Asherah was worshipped in Israel from the days of the first settlement in Canaan, the Hebrews having taken over the cult of this great mother goddess from the Canaanites. That's from Raphael Patai, the Hebrew goddess.
Yep. There you go. Take it over. You see, just as I've been saying, they're absorbing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was normal. We are relying on texts, and we are relying on commentary that was hundreds of years later, looking back. It's largely worthless, or at least has to be supplemented by the greats that I mentioned throughout these programs. If you don't have those greats, and just a few of them are mentioned on my Astrotheology's own site. We can link up to that. There's dozens more, but I try to mention the absolute greats in these series on Unenslaved. If you don't have their work, if you don't have even these Ralph Ellis's and all, God help you trying to go back into the Old Testament world and work anything out. You won't be able to do it. You tell me the difference between the kings, the judges, and the prophets, for instance, right? I mean, where are we at with this? But the most important thing is that many of those texts give you a false impression of the earlier past. They're not written during the time, not even close. But let's go on.
The cult of the goddess Asherah continued among the Hebrews throughout the periods of the judges and the kings.
Yeah, so it lasted a while. That's accepted. Let's go on.
And then more from Professor William DeVere. Asherah, almost forgotten over the centuries, reemerged and could once again be seen as the principal pal female deity of the pantheon in Canaan in pre-Israelite times. She appears at Ugarit, northeastern Syria, as the consort of the chief male deity El, the father of years.